It was supposed to be temporary, until her cold boss said, "Please don't leave me. Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start." Kennedy Brooks stood before the towering glass edifice of Rhodes and Associates architecture, her reflection fragmenting across the modernist facade. Chicago's autumn wind whipped around her, carrying fallen leaves that danced between the skyscrapers like copper confetti. She adjusted her burgundy blazer, a thrift store find that looked expensive enough to blend in with the power suits that paraded through the Loop's financial district. 3 months, she whispered to herself, rehearsing the mantra that had gotten her through the interview process. Just 90 days of playing assistant to some uptight architect, and Ashley's medical bills are covered. The thought of her niece, with her gap-toothed smile and chemotherapy-thinned hair, strengthened Kennedy's resolve. She'd graduated top of her class from University of Michigan Law School, and here she was, about to become a glorified coffee runner. But pride wouldn't pay for Ashley's treatment, and her sister Lauren's insurance had more holes than coverage. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to Mount Olympus, all chrome and mirrors, and the kind of silence that cost money. Kennedy used the time to mentally rehearse her first-day checklist. Arrive 15 minutes early. Check. Bring backup pencil skirt in case of coffee spills. Check. Memorize Nathaniel Rhodes. Schedule. Triple check. The doors opened to a space that looked more like an art gallery than an office. White walls showcased architectural models and renderings, each illuminated like precious artifacts. The reception desk, a sweeping curve of white marble, was manned by a woman whose platinum blonde hair matched the aesthetic perfectly. "Kennedy Brooks, reporting for my first day," she announced, injecting warmth into her voice. "I'm Mr. Rhodes' new executive assistant." The receptionist, Regina, according to her nameplate, gave Kennedy a once-over that felt more like a CAT scan. "You're the temporary one." Kennedy's smile didn't waver. "That's right. 3-month contract." Regina's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. "Honey, the last temp lasted 3 days. Mr. Rhodes is—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Particular." "I've handled particular before," Kennedy replied, though her stomach tightened. The salary for this position was triple what a normal executive assistant made, and now she understood why. Regina led her through the office, past glass-walled conference rooms and design spaces where architects huddled over drafting tables. The staff, Kennedy noticed, all seemed to share the same tense expression, as if bracing for impact. "Mr. Rhodes arrives precisely at 7:30, Regina explained, showing Kennedy to a desk positioned outside a corner office. "He'll expect his morning brief and coffee to be ready. The brief should include updated project timelines, press mentions, and any critical client communications from overnight, particularly from the Asian markets," Kennedy finished. "And I've studied the manual." Regina's professional mask cracked slightly, revealing something like approval. "Well, you're already ahead of the last one. Good luck." She clicked away on her heels, leaving Kennedy to settle into her new workspace. The desk was immaculate, with dual monitors and a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more than her entire apartment. Kennedy began unpacking her supplies with military precision: laptop, spare phone charger, emergency makeup kit, antacids. She'd just finished arranging everything when she heard it, the subtle shift in atmosphere that indicated someone important had arrived. Nathaniel Rhodes moved like winter itself, all cold precision and sharp edges. 6 feet of bespoke suit and carefully controlled power, he strode through the office without acknowledging a single person. His features might have been handsome if they weren't arranged in such a forbidding expression. Dark hair swept back from a high forehead, jaw tight enough to crack walnuts, and eyes the color of a frozen lake. Kennedy rose as he approached, presenting his brief and coffee with practiced efficiency. "Good morning, Mr. Rhodes. I'm Kennedy Brooks, your new assistant. I've prepared the morning updates, and your coffee is black with 2 sugars. Though I didn't specify that in any documentation," he cut in, his voice as sharp as his suit. He took the coffee, examining it like a suspect piece of evidence. "You observed the remnants in my coffee cup yesterday during the office tour." It wasn't a question, but Kennedy answered anyway. "Yes, sir. I believe in being thorough." Those ice-chip eyes finally met hers fully. Something flickered in them, surprise, perhaps, before the shutters came down again. "The Anderson portfolio is missing from my desk. Find it. Already on your tablet, sir. I took the liberty of digitizing it last night after hours. You'll find I've annotated the key points and potential issues for this morning's meeting." For a moment, just a fraction of a second, Nathaniel Rhodes looked thrown off balance. He covered it quickly, but Kennedy saw it. The crack in the ice. "I work with physical copy," he said, a slight edge in his voice, "which is why the original is also on your desk, tabbed and annotated to match the digital version," Kennedy replied smoothly. "I believe in being prepared for all contingencies." He stood there for a moment longer, coffee halfway to his lips, studying her with an intensity that would have made a lesser person squirm. Kennedy met his gaze steadily, her heart pounding, but her expression professional. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "The morning brief is at 8. Don't be late." He turned and entered his office, the door closing behind him with a soft but definitive click. Kennedy released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She sank into her chair, hands shaking slightly, as she pulled up his calendar to review the day's schedule. "Not bad, new girl," came a whispered voice. A young man at a nearby desk offered her a covert thumbs up. "That's the closest thing to approval I've seen from him in months." "I'm only temporary," Kennedy reminded him, and herself. 3 months. But as she glanced through the glass walls of Nathaniel's office, watching him read through her carefully prepared brief with total concentration, she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. He was exactly as cold as everyone had warned her, every bit the demanding, difficult boss she'd been prepared for. So why did she have the nagging feeling that she'd just caught a glimpse of something else entirely, something hidden beneath all that ice? Kennedy shook her head, dismissing the thought. She wasn't here to solve the puzzle of Nathaniel Rhodes. She was here for Ashley, for Lauren, for the kind of salary that could make a real difference in their lives. 3 months. She could handle anything for 3 months. Even a boss who looked at her like he could see right through every wall she'd ever built. Right, 2 weeks into her new position, Kennedy had mastered the art of predicting Nathaniel Rhodes' needs before he voiced them. She learned his tells, the slight furrow between his brows that meant he needed aspirin, the way his fingers drummed against his desk when he was missing a crucial piece of information, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw before a difficult client meeting. What she hadn't expected was to start noticing other things, like how his shoulders tensed when anyone mentioned his family's architectural legacy, or the way he stayed late on Thursdays, long after everyone else had gone home, staring at old blueprints with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You don't have to stay, Miss Brooks," he said one such evening, catching her organizing files at her desk. The setting sun painted his office in shades of amber and gold, softening his usual sharp edges. "I'm sure you have better things to do." Kennedy thought of her empty apartment, of the phone call she still needed to make to Lauren about Ashley's latest test results. "Actually, sir, I'd like to finish organizing these construction permits. The Miller project deadline is coming up." He studied her for a moment, that penetrating gaze that still made her pulse quicken. "You have a law degree from Michigan." It wasn't a question, but the fact that he'd looked into her background didn't surprise her. "Yes, sir. Why aren't you practicing?" "Sometimes life requires temporary detours," she answered carefully. But his unwavering stare pulled at something in her. "My niece is sick. This position, the salary helps." Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or pain, before he masked it. "Do the Miller permits can wait until morning. Go home, Ms. Brooks." But he didn't return to his blueprints. Instead, he stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back. The pose would have looked militant if not for the subtle slump of his shoulders. Kennedy should have left. It wasn't her job to wonder why Chicago's most brilliant architect looked so lost in his own reflection. She should have gathered her things and gone home to her takeout dinner and Netflix queue. Instead, she found herself asking, "Is everything all right, Mr. Rhodes?" "You're very observant, Miss Brooks." His voice was quiet, almost contemplative. "I imagine that served you well in law school." "It serves me well now," she replied, "like noticing you haven't eaten since that half sandwich at noon." He turned, surprise briefly crossing his features. "You keep track of my meals." "I keep track of everything that might affect your performance. It's my job." She hesitated, then added, "The diner across the street makes a decent turkey club." "Are you suggesting I need a dinner break, Ms. Brooks?" "I'm suggesting that even brilliant architects need fuel to function." She met his gaze steadily. "And that maybe you're not the only one who could use a proper meal." The silence that followed felt charged, like the air before a storm. Kennedy held her breath, certain she'd overstepped. Nathaniel Rhodes didn't do casual dinners with employees. He probably had a private chef or a standing reservation at some exclusive restaurant where the wine cost more than her monthly rent. "Get your coat." Kennedy blinked. "I'm sorry." "Your coat, Ms. Brooks." Was that amusement in his voice? "Unless you'd prefer to brave the Chicago wind without one." 10 minutes later, they sat in a worn vinyl booth at Jerry's Diner. The fluorescent lights a harsh contrast to the sophisticated ambiance of their office. Nathaniel looked almost comically out of place in his three-piece suit, yet he studied the laminated menu with the same intensity he gave to architectural plans. "Oh, the Turkey Club is safe," Kennedy offered, trying not to stare at the surreal sight of her intimidating boss contemplating meatloaf specials. "But the French dip is their real specialty." He ordered both. When she raised an eyebrow, he almost smiled. "I haven't eaten since that half sandwich at noon, remember?" Their food arrived with the efficiency of a diner that knew its late-night clientele needed quick service. Kennedy watched, fascinated, as Nathaniel Rhodes carefully cut his sandwich with a knife and fork. "My brother would have loved this place," he said suddenly, so quietly she almost missed it. He had a thing for hole-in-the-wall diners, said you could tell more about a city from its greasy spoons than its five-star restaurants. Had past tense. Kennedy's heart squeezed. He sounds wise. He was. Nathaniel's knife scraped against the plate, the sound sharp and discordant. "Until I convinced him to take that shortcut through Lincoln Park." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Kennedy thought of Ashley, of hospital rooms and waiting rooms and the constant fear of loss. Without thinking, she reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. "Mr. Rhodes, it's late," he cut her off, his walls slamming back into place so fast she could almost hear them. He pulled out his wallet, laying down enough cash to cover both their meals and a generous tip. "I'll have a car take you home." "That's not necessary." "It's past midnight, Miss Brooks. Consider it part of your job requirements." He stood, straightening his already impeccable suit. "I'll see you tomorrow. The Miller permits will need your attention first thing." Kennedy watched him stride out of the diner, his rigid posture betraying none of the vulnerability she'd glimpsed moments before. But she couldn't forget it, that brief flash of raw pain, the way his voice had softened when he spoke of his brother. Later that night, in the back of the luxury car he'd insisted on sending, Kennedy stared out at the city lights and thought about walls. The ones people built to keep others out, and the ones they built to keep themselves in. She thought about ice and the way it could preserve things. Pain, guilt, grief, keeping them frozen in time. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "Ashley's asking for her favorite aunt? FaceTime tomorrow?" Kennedy smiled, warmth flooding her chest. Yes, she had taken this job for Ashley, for her family. But as she remembered the lost look in Nathaniel Rhodes' eyes, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was another purpose to her temporary position, one she hadn't anticipated. Her own voice echoed in her head. "I keep track of everything that might affect your performance. It's my job." But noticing the pain behind his perfect facade, the way his hands shook slightly when he mentioned his brother, The fact that he ate his sandwich with careful, measured bites, as if afraid to let go of control even for a moment, that wasn't part of her job description at all. And that, Kennedy realized as the car pulled up to her apartment building, might be exactly why it mattered. The first sign that something was wrong came at 7:42 a.m. Nathaniel Rhodes was late, 12 minutes late, for the first time since Kennedy had started working for him. She stood by his office door, morning brief in one hand, coffee growing cold in the other, fighting the inexplicable urge to call hospitals. At 7:43, the elevator doors opened. Kennedy's relief at seeing him lasted exactly 2 seconds before her trained eye caught the details. Slightly rumpled suit, tie marginally askew, a darkness around his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. "Mr. Rhodes, not now." He brushed past her into his office, the door closing with more force than necessary. Kennedy hesitated, her hand hovering over the intercom. The morning brief was crucial. They had the Anderson presentation at 9, and the client was flying in from Seattle specifically to... A crash from inside his office made the decision for her. Kennedy opened the door without knocking, a move that could very well end her employment then and there. Nathaniel stood by his desk, surrounded by scattered papers and a broken picture frame. His hands were braced against the desk's edge, knuckles white with tension. For a moment, Kennedy thought he might yell at her for the intrusion. Instead, he spoke so quietly she had to strain to hear. "It's his birthday." Understanding hit her like a physical blow. His brother, the one who died in Lincoln Park. The one whose ghost seemed to haunt every Thursday night. "The Anderson meeting," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his usually perfect hair. "I need to reschedule." "No, you don't?" Kennedy closed the door behind her, already pulling out her phone. "Give me 5 minutes." She worked with swift efficiency, fingers flying over the screen. First, a text to Regina about moving the morning brief to 8:30. Then a call to Nathaniel's favorite tailor, who owed her a favor after she'd helped his daughter get an interview at Rhodes & Associates. "Antonio, I need a rush delivery. Yes, to the office. No, it can't wait." She glanced at Nathaniel, who watched her with an unreadable expression. Dark grey, 3-piece, his usual measurements, and a white shirt. "Have Robert bring them up the service elevator." Next, she pulled a small sewing kit from her desk drawer, because being prepared meant being prepared for everything, and approached Nathaniel slowly, as if he were a wounded animal that might bolt. "Sir, if you'll allow me." She gestured to his tie. He stared at her for a long moment before giving a slight nod. Kennedy stepped closer, close enough to catch the faint scent of his cologne mingled with something else. Whiskey, maybe. She kept her movements professional as she straightened and reknotted his tie, but she couldn't help noticing the slight tremor in his breathing. "The Anderson meeting will proceed as scheduled," she said, focusing on the silk between her fingers rather than the intensity of his gaze. "But afterward, your schedule is clear until 2. Personal emergency. Non-negotiable. Miss Brooks, your fresh suit will be here in 10 minutes. I've pushed the brief to 8:30, giving you time to change and review the materials. I'll handle all calls and emails until then." She finished with his tie and stepped back, maintaining eye contact. "And sir, there's a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, the kind your brother would have loved. It's quiet, out of the way. No one would think to look for you there." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, gratitude, and something else she couldn't name. "You're exceeding your job description, Miss Brooks." "That's what makes me excellent at it, sir." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Indeed." The next few hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Kennedy orchestrated everything from the shadows, the arrival of the fresh suit, the rescheduling of minor meetings, the strategic placement of aspirin and water on his desk. The Anderson presentation went flawlessly. Nathaniel was nothing if not professional, even when breaking inside. At 11:30, she handed him a small card with an address written in her precise handwriting. "The coffee shop. Ask for Maya, and she'll give you the back corner table." He took the card, his fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. "You've been busy. I make it my business to know things, Mr. Rhodes. Places to hide, people to trust, secrets to keep." "And what other secrets are you keeping, Mrs. Brooks?" The question caught her off guard. She thought of Ashley's latest test results, tucked away in her purse. The ones showing the treatment wasn't working as well as they'd hoped. The ones she hadn't told anyone about yet. Not even Lauren. "Everyone has secrets," she said finally, "even temporary employees." His eyes narrowed slightly at the word temporary, as if he'd forgotten that detail. Before he could respond, her phone buzzed, a text from Lauren. "Go," Kennedy said, already turning toward her desk. "Maya makes excellent chai lattes. Your brother would have appreciated that." She felt his gaze on her back as she walked away, heavy with unasked questions. Only when she heard the elevator doors close did she allow herself to look at Lauren's text. "Hospital called. Need you here ASAP." Kennedy's hands trembled as she gathered her things. She'd arranged Nathaniel's escape. Now she needed one of her own. But as she rushed toward the elevator, her carefully constructed walls began to crack. One crisis at a time, that was her rule. Don't let them bleed together. Don't let personal pain affect professional performance. The elevator doors opened, and she nearly collided with Nathaniel, who apparently hadn't left yet. "Ms. Brooks." His voice sharpened with concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sir. Family emergency. I've already updated your calendar and—" Kennedy. The use of her first name stopped her cold. What's wrong? Maybe it was the gentleness in his voice, so at odds with his usual demeanor. Maybe it was the stress of the morning, of holding everyone else together while her own world threatened to unravel. Or maybe it was just that he'd chosen today, of all days, to show he'd been paying attention too. "My niece," she whispered, hating the way her voice cracked. The hospital called. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Without a word, he pulled out his phone. "Charles, bring the car around. We'll need you for the afternoon." He looked at Kennedy. "Which hospital?" "Sir, you don't have to—" "Which hospital, Miss Brooks?" "Northwestern Memorial." The fight drained out of her. "But your brother would have understood that some things are more important than grieving alone." He guided her into the elevator with a gentle hand on her elbow. "We all have our ghosts, Miss Brooks. Today, we'll face them together." As the elevator descended, Kennedy felt something shift between them, a subtle realignment, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface. They were no longer just boss and employee, sharing an uncomfortable glimpse of each other's pain. They were two people choosing not to look away, and that, she realized as they stepped into the waiting car, was infinitely more dangerous than any secret either of them had been keeping. The day after the hospital visit dawned cold and gray, Chicago's November chill seeping through Kennedy's wool coat as she waited outside Northwestern Memorial. She'd been there since dawn, using the quiet hours to catch up on work emails and trying not to think about yesterday, about the way Nathaniel Rhodes had sat silently beside her in the waiting room, his presence both comforting and confusing. "You should go home and rest." Lauren appeared beside her, 2 coffee cups in hand. "You've been here all night." Kennedy accepted the coffee gratefully. "How's Ashley?" "Sleeping. The new medication seems to be helping with the pain." Lauren's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but her smile was genuine. She asked about your fancy boss earlier. Said he looked like one of her Disney princes. Heat crept up Kennedy's neck. "He was just being kind." "Kind?" Lauren raised an eyebrow. "The man sat in that waiting room for 6 hours. Kennedy. He ordered dinner for the entire nursing staff. Then he made 3 phone calls, and suddenly Ashley's getting a consultation with the top pediatric oncologist in the country." She paused. "That's not kindness. That's something else. It's complicated. Isn't it always?" Lauren squeezed her arm. "Just be careful, okay? I know that look in your eyes." "What look?" "The same one you had before you took this job, like you're about to do something either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." Kennedy's phone buzzed. A text from Regina. "Where are you? He's been pacing for 20 minutes. I have to go." Kennedy hugged her sister tightly. Call me if anything changes. Of course. Lauren held her at arm's length. And Ken, thank him for me. For everything. The drive to Rhodes and Associates felt longer than usual, her mind replaying moments from yesterday. Nathaniel's hand steady on her back as they waited for news, the quiet authority in his voice as he spoke with doctors, the way he'd memorized Ashley's medical history after hearing it just once. When the elevator doors opened to the 42nd floor, she found him standing at her desk, examining a stack of files with fierce concentration. Mr. Rhodes, she kept her voice professionally neutral. I apologize for my late arrival. He turned, and for a moment she saw something flash across his face. Relief, concern, but his voice was pure CEO when he spoke. The Morrison portfolio needs revision. The sustainability metrics are off, and just like that, they were back to boss and employee, as if he hadn't spent yesterday watching her cry into cheap hospital coffee, as if she hadn't seen him slip his expensive suit jacket around a shivering Ashley when the hospital room got too cold. I'll review it immediately, she said, sliding behind her desk. Also, the board called. They want to move the quarterly meeting to next week. Decline. I'm flying to Seattle on Wednesday. Kennedy frowned at her calendar. Seattle isn't on your schedule. It is now. He handed her a folder. The Anderson project needs personal oversight. Book the usual hotel. I'll be there through Sunday. 5 days. The longest he'd been away since she started. Kennedy ignored the strange twist in her stomach and focused on logistics. Will you need the full team? No. He paused at his office door. But you'll be coming with me. Kennedy's fingers froze over her keyboard. Sir, the Anderson contract is complex. I'll need someone who understands both the legal and administrative aspects. His tone was perfectly professional, but his eyes held something else. Unless you have obligations here, Ashley's face flashed through her mind. I'll need to make some calls. Of course. He hesitated, then added softly, how is she? Stable. The new medication. Kennedy swallowed hard. Thank you for everything you did yesterday. I made a few phone calls, Mrs. Brooks. Nothing more. We both know that's not true. Their eyes met, and for a moment the professional facade cracked. Kennedy saw the same man who had sat beside her for hours, who had somehow known exactly when to speak and when to simply be present. Then Regina rounded the corner with a stack of contracts, and the moment shattered. The Morrison portfolio, he said crisply. On my desk in an hour. Kennedy spent the rest of the morning buried in work, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her through the office. By lunch, she'd heard at least 3 different versions of yesterday's events, each more dramatic than the last. Her favorite involved Nathaniel carrying Ashley through the hospital halls like some kind of corporate knight in shining armor. The reality had been both simpler and more complicated. He hadn't done anything outwardly dramatic. He'd just stayed through the tests and the waiting and the final diagnosis. He'd been a solid presence at her side, handling calls and emails so she could focus on her family. And when Ashley had finally fallen asleep, he'd driven Kennedy home himself, waiting in the car until he saw her lights come on. Now he was taking her to Seattle, for work, she reminded herself firmly, because she was good at her job, and the Anderson project needed attention, not because of the way he'd looked at her in the hospital when she finally broke down, not because of how natural it had felt to lean against his shoulder, his expensive cologne mixing with antiseptic hospital air. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Ashley's asking when you're coming back. She wants to thank her prince for the stuffed bear. Kennedy smiled despite herself. The bear had appeared mysteriously this morning, a huge, soft thing wearing a tiny architect's hard hat. She hadn't asked who sent it. She hadn't needed to. A shadow fell across her desk. The Morrison portfolio. She handed him the revised files without looking up, afraid of what he might see in her eyes. The sustainability section has been updated. I also found some discrepancies in the cost projections. Good. He took the folder, but didn't move away. Ms. Brooks? Yes. About Seattle. He sounded almost uncertain. so unlike his usual self that she had to look up. If it's too soon, with Ashley's condition. It's not. Kennedy met his gaze steadily. I can do my job, Mr. Rhodes. I've never doubted that. His voice softened. But after yesterday was yesterday. She straightened her spine. Today, I'm your executive assistant, and you need me in Seattle. The rest isn't relevant. Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, resignation, but he only nodded. Book the flights. First class. Coach is fine. First class, he repeated firmly. And Ms. Brooks, the bear. Ashley liked it. Kennedy's throat tightened. She loved it. The hard hat was a nice touch. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. I thought so too. He retreated to his office, leaving Kennedy to stare at her computer screen without really seeing it. 5 days in Seattle. 5 days of pretending yesterday hadn't changed everything. 5 days of maintaining professional distance when all she could think about was the way his hand had felt on her back. Steady and warm and completely inappropriate. Be careful, Lauren had said. But Kennedy was beginning to suspect it was far too late for that. Seattle greeted them with its signature rain, a fine mist that made the city look like an impressionist painting. From the window of their cab, Kennedy watched the Space Needle pierce through low-hanging clouds, its outline blurred like a half-finished sketch. The weather matched her mood, hazy, unsettled, caught between states. The Anderson team will be ready at 9, she said, reviewing her tablet. They've requested a site visit before the formal presentation. Nathaniel sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his arm, yet somehow managing to maintain perfect professional distance. Their sustainability concerns, addressed in the revised proposals. I had the team incorporate local materials and... Her phone buzzed with Lauren's ringtone. Excuse me, I need to take this, she answered, turning slightly toward the window. Lauren, is everything okay? She's asking for you. Her sister's voice was tight. The pain is... It's bad, Ken. Kennedy closed her eyes, guilt crushing her chest. Put her on. There was rustling. Then Ashley's small voice. Aunt Kenny? Hey, sweetie. Kennedy forced brightness into her tone. How's my favorite architect in training? Mr. Rhodes Bear helped me design a hospital today. Ashley's voice was weak, but excited. With a butterfly garden on the roof. Can you tell him? Kennedy felt Nathaniel shift beside her. I'll make sure he knows. When are you coming back? Soon, baby. Really soon. Kennedy swallowed hard. Why don't you tell me about this butterfly garden? Ashley launched into a detailed description, her pain momentarily forgotten in the excitement of creation. Kennedy listened, making appropriate sounds of amazement, until Ashley's voice grew tired and Lauren took the phone back. The doctors are adjusting her medication, Lauren said quietly. Don't worry. We've got this. Focus on your work. The call ended, leaving Kennedy staring at her dark screen, trying to rebuild her professional walls. She felt Nathaniel's eyes on her but couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. Ms. Brooks, his voice was soft, dangerous in its gentleness. If you need to return. I don't. She straightened, squaring her shoulders. The Anderson presentation can wait. No, it can't. Finally, she turned to face him. This project matters. The sustainability initiatives could change how cities approach urban development. Ashley understands that. She's already designing hospitals with butterfly gardens. Something shifted in his expression. Tell me about this hospital design. Kennedy blinked, thrown by the request. Sir, your niece's design, with the butterfly garden. Tell me about it. So she did. She described Ashley's vision of a hospital that didn't feel like a hospital. All curved lines and natural light, with gardens where patients could feel the sun on their faces. As she spoke, Nathaniel pulled out his notebook and began sketching. Just like this, he asked, showing her a rough design that somehow captured both Ashley's whimsy and practical medical requirements. Yes, exactly like... Kennedy stopped, realizing they'd drifted far from professional territory. The Anderson files. We'll be there after breakfast. He tucked the sketch into his jacket pocket. which you're going to eat. At the hotel restaurant, doctor's orders. You're not a doctor. No, but I did speak with one this morning, doctor. Phillips sends his regards and says Ashley's latest blood work shows improvement. Kennedy stared at him. You called her doctor. I make it my business to know things, Mrs. Brooks. He echoed her words from days ago, a hint of warmth breaking through his professional mask. Places to hide, people to trust, secrets to keep. The cab pulled up to their hotel, a luxurious building overlooking Puget Sound. Kennedy tried to focus on check-in procedures, on their packed schedule, on anything except the way Nathaniel's hand brushed her lower back as they walked to the elevator. Your room is on the 20th floor, she said, handing him his key card. The Anderson files are already there. I'll be on 18 if you need... No, Kennedy frowned. Sir, you'll be on 20 as well. Adjacent room. At her startled look, he added, the Anderson team has a habit of calling at all hours. We need to be able to coordinate quickly. It was a perfectly logical explanation, professional, reasonable. So why did it feel like something else entirely? Of course, she adjusted her itinerary. Will you want to review the presentations tonight? After dinner, I can have something sent up. The hotel restaurant, Miss Brooks. 7 o'clock. He stepped into the elevator. Wear something that isn't corporate armor. The doors closed before she could respond, leaving her in the opulent lobby with her heart racing and her carefully maintained boundaries crumbling. Hours later, Kennedy stood in front of her hotel room mirror, scrutinizing her reflection. She'd chosen a deep purple wrap dress, elegant but not overtly formal. Her hair, usually confined in a strict bun, fell in soft curls around her shoulders. The overall effect was dangerous. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Ashley loved the architect's sketch. She's already planning additions. Should I be worried that my daughter's career path is changing? Attached was a photo of Ashley in her hospital bed, beaming as she held up Nathaniel's sketch. He must have had it messengered over immediately after their arrival. The thought made Kennedy's chest tight. A knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Nathaniel, his usual suit replaced by charcoal slacks and a cream sweater that softened his sharp edges. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance. Miss Brooks. Mr. Rhodes. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with everything they couldn't say. Finally, he cleared his throat. I received a very detailed voice message about butterfly migration patterns and their impact on rooftop garden design. Kennedy couldn't help smiling. Ashley's been researching. So I gathered. His expression softened. She has good instincts. The garden placement in relation to the pediatric ward, it's innovative. She'll be thrilled to hear that. Then we should call her, after dinner. He offered his arm, the gesture somehow both formal and intimate. Shall we? Kennedy knew she should make an excuse, should maintain professional distance, should remember that in 2 months she'd be leaving this job, this man, this complicated dance of boundaries and emotions. Instead, she took his arm. The elevator ride was silent, filled with the kind of tension that made it hard to breathe. Kennedy watched their reflection in the mirrored walls, her dark skin against his pale sweater, the way they fit together like adjacent pieces of a puzzle that shouldn't work, but somehow did. Kennedy. His voice was low, almost a whisper. Yes, the Anderson presentation will be perfect, she finished, grateful for the return to professional territory. I triple-checked everything. I know. He looked down at her, his eyes intense. You always do. The elevator doors opened to the restaurant, and reality rushed back in. They separated smoothly, returning to their professional roles with practiced ease. But as they followed the host to their table, Kennedy couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Seattle's rain painted the windows with liquid light, blurring the lines between sky and sea, between professional and personal, between what was safe and what was inevitable. And Kennedy, who had built her career on maintaining clear boundaries, found herself wondering if some lines were meant to be crossed. The hotel restaurant was dimly lit. all dark wood and flickering candlelight that turned the rain-streaked windows into abstract paintings. Kennedy sat across from Nathaniel, hyper-aware of how different this felt from their late-night diner encounter in Chicago. Here, with the Space Needle glowing through the mist and soft jazz playing in the background, every moment felt weighted with possibility. "The wine list, sir." The sommelier appeared at Nathaniel's elbow. "The Bordeaux," he said without looking at the menu. "The 82, if you have it." Kennedy raised an eyebrow. "Something special about 1982? My brother's birth year." Nathaniel's voice was quiet. "He used to say life was too short for mediocre wine. Tell me about him." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Nathaniel was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "His name was Daniel. He was everything I'm not. Spontaneous, quick to laugh, terrible at following blueprints, but brilliant at seeing possibilities I missed." His fingers traced the stem of his water glass. "The day he died, we were arguing about a project. The Lincoln Park development. What was the argument about? He wanted to preserve an old community center, incorporate it into the new design. I said it would compromise the project's integrity." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "He was taking a shortcut through the park to cool off when—" "It wasn't your fault," Kennedy said softly. "Wasn't it?" His eyes met hers, raw with old pain. "He was there because of me. Because I was too rigid, too focused on my vision to see—" He broke off as the sommelier returned with the wine. Kennedy waited until they were alone again. "The hospital design Ashley made, the one with the butterfly garden. It reminds me of what you just described about Daniel, seeing possibilities others might miss." Something flickered in Nathaniel's expression. "She's a remarkable child." "Yes, she is." Kennedy swallowed hard. "And she's going to beat this. She has to." Under the table, his hand found hers, warm and steady. "Tell me about her. Not her illness. Her." So Kennedy did. She told him about Ashley's obsession with building elaborate blanket forts, about her dream of designing homes for every stray cat in Chicago, about how she'd started sketching buildings on her hospital room window to improve the view for other patients. Nathaniel listened with complete attention, occasionally asking questions that showed he was truly engaging with her stories. When their food arrived, neither of them moved to separate their hands. "The Anderson presentation tomorrow," he said finally, reluctantly returning to business. "The sustainability elements—" "Can wait 10 more minutes," Kennedy interrupted, surprising herself. "Tell me more about Daniel. What would he think of Ashley's butterfly garden?" A genuine smile touched Nathaniel's lips. He would have insisted on adding a slide from the pediatric ward directly into it. "Ashley would love that. I could add it to the sketch. A curved one, following the natural flow of the building." They spent the next hour trading ideas, drawing on napkins, their food growing cold as they built an imaginary hospital that would never exist. It was the most relaxed Kennedy had ever seen him, his usual sharp edges softened by wine and memories and shared purpose. Then his phone rang. The transformation was immediate. His walls slammed back into place as he checked the caller ID. "I need to take this." Kennedy watched him walk to a quiet corner, his posture rigid once again. Even from across the room, she could see the tension in his shoulders increasing with each passing moment. When he returned, his face was unreadable. "We have a problem." "The Anderson project." "No." He took a long drink of wine. "The board. They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning in Chicago." Kennedy was already pulling up their flight options on her phone. "I'll book us on the red-eye. We can be back by—" "Not us. Just me." His voice was cold, professional. "You'll stay here, handle the Anderson presentation." She stared at him. "Alone? But the technical specifications, you know them better than anyone." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "The board meeting. It's about succession planning. My father's health is declining." Understanding dawned. The Rhodes family empire passing to its reluctant heir. "When did you last speak to him?" "The day Daniel died." Nathaniel's voice was flat. "He said I was responsible. He wasn't wrong." "Nathaniel." The use of his first name made him look up sharply. You can't keep punishing yourself for Ms. Brooks. The formal address felt like a slap. Book my flight. Have the Anderson files ready for my review before I leave. That will be all. Just like that, the man who'd spent an hour designing whimsical butterfly gardens disappeared, replaced by the cold CEO she'd first met. Kennedy felt the loss like a physical ache. Of course, sir. She stood, gathering her professional dignity around her like armor. Will there be anything else? Something flashed in his eyes, regret, longing, but his voice remained distant. No, thank you for dinner. Kennedy walked to the elevator alone, her heels clicking against marble in a rhythm that matched her racing heart. Behind her, she heard the distinctive sound of a wine glass being set down too hard, followed by a quiet curse. In her room, she moved on autopilot, booking his flight, preparing files, sending updates to the Anderson team. Only when everything was arranged did she allow herself to sink onto the edge of her bed, still in her purple dress that now felt like a costume from someone else's life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Ashley's asking if her architect friend liked her new garden ideas. Kennedy stared at the message, remembering the way Nathaniel's eyes had lit up as they planned impossible slides and butterfly migrations. The way his hand had felt in hers, warm and real and right. Before she could second-guess herself, she grabbed a hotel notepad and began to write, "The board meeting isn't about succession, it's about guilt. About walls you built so high you can't see over them anymore. About a brother who saw possibilities and a father who only saw blame. But Ashley sees possibilities too, in butterfly gardens and blanket forts and hospitals that make children smile. And maybe, just maybe, that's worth more than all the guilt in the world. The Anderson presentation will be perfect. You know it will. But there are more important blueprints to fix." Kay. She slipped the note under his door before she could lose her courage, then returned to her room to pack up her presentations and her broken professional boundaries. Hours later, she stood at her window watching planes take off into the rainy night, each set of lights carrying someone toward or away from something that mattered. Her phone stayed silent. No response to her note, no acknowledgement of boundaries crossed. Just the Seattle rain, washing away an evening of almost and what if, leaving her alone with presentations to give and feelings to ignore, and 2 months left on a contract that suddenly felt both too long and not long enough. In the distance, the Space Needle glowed through the mist like a beacon, reminding her that some structures were built to stand alone, reaching for something they could never quite touch. She wondered if Nathaniel was looking at it too, or if he was already halfway to Chicago, running from ghosts she was only beginning to understand. The Anderson presentation went perfectly, just as Kennedy had promised it would. She stood before Seattle's most demanding developers and channeled everything she'd learned from watching Nathaniel. The quiet authority, the precise gestures, the way to make complex architectural concepts feel inevitable. By the end, they were eating out of her hand. "Remarkable work," the lead developer said, shaking her hand. "Rhodes trained you well." Kennedy's smile didn't waver. The design speaks for itself. But as she packed up her materials, she couldn't help checking her phone again. Still nothing from Chicago, no response to her note, no acknowledgement of the successful presentation, just silence stretching across 3 time zones. Her own message from earlier that morning stared back at her. Contract signed, designs approved, flying back tonight. She'd typed and deleted 3 different versions of that text before sending the most professional one possible. Now, hours later, there wasn't even a read receipt. Ms. Brooks, one of the junior developers, lingered behind. I couldn't help but notice the sustainable garden integration, the butterfly migration patterns. It's an unusual touch. Kennedy's throat tightened as she remembered sketching those patterns on napkins, watching Nathaniel's eyes light up with possibilities. Sometimes the best innovations come from unexpected places. Her phone buzzed. Lauren, not Nathaniel, Doctor wants to try new treatment protocol. Can you come to the hospital when you land? The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of timing. The flight back to Chicago felt endless. Kennedy spent it reviewing the Anderson contracts, making notes in the margins, doing anything to avoid thinking about the man who should have been sitting beside her, arguing about structural integrity and making subtle jokes about Seattle's coffee addiction. When she finally walked into Northwestern Memorial at nearly midnight, the fluorescent lights made her head pound. She found Lauren in the familiar waiting room, clutching a cup of cold coffee. "How is she?" "Scared." Lauren's voice cracked. "The new protocol. It's aggressive, experimental. But Dr. Phillips says—" "Dr. Phillips?" Kennedy's heart skipped. "I thought Dr. Martinez was handling her case." "He was. But apparently, Dr. Phillips is the best in the country for this type of treatment. He specifically requested to take on Ashley's case." Lauren gave her a knowing look. "Something about a recommendation from a very persuasive architect." Kennedy sank into a chair, her professional armor cracking. Even now, even after she'd crossed lines with that note, he was still looking out for Ashley, still pulling strings and making calls and refusing to talk about any of it. "Can I see her?" "She's finally sleeping." Lauren squeezed her hand, but she added a movie theater to her hospital designs, said, and I quote, "Mr. Rhodes will totally approve because movies are architecture for the imagination." Kennedy laughed despite herself, the sound catching on something that felt dangerously like a sob. "Want to talk about it?" Lauren asked softly. "There's nothing to talk about." Kennedy straightened her spine. "I'm his temporary assistant. In 6 weeks, this contract ends, and I go back to law." "Right. Because temporary assistants always have CEOs flying across the country to sit in hospital waiting rooms, or getting world-famous doctors to take their cases, or designing whimsical buildings with their sick nieces." "Lauren, I see the way you light up when you talk about work, and I don't mean the contracts or the presentations. I mean him, the way he challenges you, the way you understand each other." "It doesn't matter." Kennedy stood, needing to move. He's not available, not emotionally. There's too much history, too much pain. And you're not exactly the poster child for emotional availability either, sis." Lauren's voice was gentle. "Not since David." The name hit like a physical blow. David, her ex-fiancé, who'd walked away the moment things got hard, who'd said he couldn't handle the responsibility of a partner whose family needed so much support. "This isn't about David." "No." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you running?" "I'm not—" Kennedy's phone buzzed. A text from Regina. "He's back. Board meeting was brutal. You should know." The next words made her blood run cold. "They're announcing his engagement next week to Victoria Ashcroft. Merger of the century." Kennedy stared at the screen, remembering the wine glasses in Seattle, the gentle way he'd held her hand under the table, the broken sound in his voice when he'd talked about Daniel. All of it meaningless, all of it a lie. "Ken?" Lauren touched her arm. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Kennedy locked her phone, locked her heart. "Nothing at all. Tell Ashley I'll come back in the morning. I need to go." She made it to her car before the tears came. Hot, angry tears that had nothing to do with professional boundaries and everything to do with the way he'd looked at her in that Seattle restaurant. The way he'd made her believe, just for a moment, that some walls were meant to be broken. Her phone buzzed again. Nathaniel's name lit up her screen for the first time in days. "We need to talk." Kennedy wiped her eyes, grief turning to steel. "Congratulations on your engagement, Mr. Rhodes. The Anderson contracts are on your desk. Will there be anything else?" The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Kennedy, please." She turned off her phone. The drive home was a blur of city lights and radio static. Kennedy parked in front of her building on autopilot, too numb to notice the sleek black car already waiting there, too lost in her own pain to register the tall figure leaning against her doorway, until she was almost on top of him. "Ms. Brooks." Nathaniel looked terrible. His usually perfect suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it for hours. But his eyes were what stopped her. They held the same raw desperation she'd seen in the hospital when Ashley's monitors wouldn't stop beeping. "Go home, Mr. Rhodes." She moved to step around him. "I'm sure your fiancé is waiting." "It's not what you think. It never is." Kennedy's laugh was bitter. "The merger of the century, right? Your father must be thrilled." "My father is dying." The words fell between them like stones. "Brain tumor. Inoperable. The merger. It was his final request, his way of securing the company's future." Kennedy's keys slipped from suddenly numb fingers. He caught them before they hit the ground, and for a moment they were frozen there, both holding the same small piece of metal. "I don't expect you to understand," he said quietly, "but after what happened with Daniel, I owe him this much." "You don't owe anyone the rest of your life." Kennedy's voice shook. "And I don't owe you anything at all. Not any more." She pulled her keys from his grasp and unlocked her door. But before she could close it, he spoke again. "The note you left in Seattle." His voice was rough. "You were right. About all of it. About the guilt and the walls and Ashley seeing possibilities I'd forgotten existed." Kennedy rested her forehead against the doorframe, suddenly exhausted. "But it doesn't matter anymore." "It matters." He took a step closer. "You matter. Don't." She held up a hand. "Don't say things you can't take back. Don't make promises you can't keep. Just don't." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they couldn't be. "The Anderson contracts," she said finally, her voice professional again. "They'll need your signature by morning, and Regina will need the press release for the engagement announcement. And I need you to leave." She closed the door before he could respond, sliding down against it until she hit the floor. Through the wood, she heard him stay there for a long moment, heard him start to say something, then stop. Finally, his footsteps retreated. A car door opened and closed. An engine started. Kennedy sat there until the sun rose, watching shadows move across her wall and wondering how something temporary could leave such permanent scars. The engagement announcement dominated every business publication in Chicago. Kennedy couldn't escape it. Victoria Ashcroft's perfect smile beamed from magazine covers in every coffee shop, every newsstand, every waiting room. The photos made them look like corporate royalty. Nathaniel in his impeccable suits, Victoria draped in designer dresses. Both of them posed against the backdrop of their combined architectural empires. "You're torturing yourself," Regina said, dropping a stack of contracts on Kennedy's desk. "Stop reading that trash." Kennedy closed the browser tab, showing yet another article about the merger of the decade. "I'm just staying informed about company news." "Right." Regina perched on the edge of her desk. "That's why you've been here until midnight every day this week, drowning yourself in work. Because you're such a dedicated employee. I have a lot to finish before my contract ends. 4 weeks. Just 4 more weeks of pretending her heart didn't crack every time he walked past, without meeting her eyes. He's miserable, you know." Regina's voice softened. "I haven't seen him this bad since Daniel." He made his choice. Kennedy focused on her computer screen. "The Anderson team needs these revisions by—" "Kennedy." Regina waited until she looked up. He sits in his office staring at that hospital sketch, the one with the butterfly garden. Sometimes he adds to it. New wings, better gardens, that ridiculous slide Ashley wanted." Pain squeezed Kennedy's chest. "Regina, please." "Fine." The older woman stood. "But when you're ready to hear the whole story about this engagement, come find me." Before Kennedy could respond, her phone lit up with Lauren's number. Her sister never called during work hours unless— "Ashley," Kennedy's voice shook. "Is she—" "The new treatment." Lauren was crying. "It's not. They're saying we need to prepare—" Kennedy was on her feet before Lauren finished speaking. "I'm coming, right now." She grabbed her coat, barely remembering to grab her phone and keys. As she rushed toward the elevator, she nearly collided with Nathaniel coming out of his office. For a moment, they stood frozen. This close, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He looked as exhausted as she felt. "Ms. Brooks, I have to go." She tried to step around him. "Family emergency." His hand caught her elbow. "Ashley." The genuine concern in his voice nearly broke her. "The treatment, it's not working." Something fierce flashed across his face. "I'll drive you." "No." Kennedy pulled away. "Your fiancé is waiting. Board meeting at 2. Remember." "Kennedy, don't." She backed into the elevator. "Just don't." The hospital was a blur of white walls and beeping machines. Kennedy found Lauren in Ashley's room, holding their niece's too small hand. Ashley looked tiny in the big hospital bed, her skin pale except for dark circles under her eyes. "Aunt Kenny," Ashley's voice was weak. "Did you bring Mr. Rhodes?" "I finished the butterfly garden plans." Kennedy's throat closed up. "Not today, sweetie, but I'm here. I'm right here." Hours passed in a haze of doctor consultations and painful decisions. Dr. Phillips himself came by, his kind eyes grave as he explained their options, or rather, their lack of options. "There's one more treatment we could try," he said. "Experimental, very expensive, but given Ashley's condition, we'll remortgage the house," Lauren said immediately. "Sell everything. It's covered." They all turned to find Nathaniel standing in the doorway, still in his board meeting suit. His eyes were fixed on Ashley's sleeping form. "Mr. Rhodes," Lauren stood, "we can't possibly—" "It's done!" His voice was firm. "Dr. Phillips has my authorization for whatever Ashley needs." Kennedy felt like she was underwater, everything muffled and distant. "The board meeting can wait." He finally looked at her, his eyes intense. "Some things are more important. Your father knows exactly where I am." Something like defiance crossed his face. "He's the one who taught me that family obligations come first, even if it's not the family he had in mind." Lauren looked between them, understanding dawning. "I'll get some coffee." "Ken, I'll stay with Ashley." Kennedy couldn't take her eyes off Nathaniel. She shouldn't wake up alone. Once Lauren was gone, the silence stretched between them like a living thing. Nathaniel moved closer to Ashley's bed, his expression softening as he looked at her drawings scattered across the bedside table. "And the butterfly garden has a telescope now," he noted, picking up one sketch, "for stargazing. She says architecture shouldn't stop at the sky." Kennedy's voice cracked. "Why are you here?" "Because a very wise woman once told me there are more important blueprints to fix." He set down the drawing. "The merger, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You're doing what's expected, following the perfect plan, sacrificing yourself to please a father who has 6 months to live." Nathaniel's voice was raw. "The doctors confirmed it yesterday. 6 months to make peace with everything I've done wrong, everything he thinks I've done wrong." Kennedy's anger crumbled. "Nathaniel, the merger was his idea, his way of ensuring the company's future. Victoria understands it's a business arrangement, nothing more." He ran a hand through his hair. I thought I could do it, be the son he wanted, the heir he deserved. But then you left that note in Seattle, and I realized what? That some walls aren't meant to be permanent." He took a step toward her. "That sometimes the best designs come from starting over, from seeing possibilities instead of problems." "Don't!" Kennedy wrapped her arms around herself. "Don't say things that sound like promises you can't keep." "I ended it." The words fell between them like stones. "The engagement, the merger, all of it. My father, he wasn't happy. But when I told him about Ashley, about her hospital designs, about how she sees the world," a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "He asked to see the drawings." Kennedy's head spun. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done building walls, done letting guilt dictate my future, done pretending I'm not falling in love with a temporary assistant who sees right through every defense I've ever built." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "Done being afraid of possibilities." Before she could respond, Ashley stirred. "Mr. Rhodes," her voice was sleepy, "did you like my telescope garden?" "I love it." He moved to her bedside, his voice gentling. Oh, but I think it needs something. Maybe a planetarium. Ashley's tired face lit up. Can we design it now? Of course. He pulled out his notebook. But first, how do you feel about staying in a special hospital? One in Switzerland, with real mountains and the clearest view of the stars you've ever seen. Kennedy's breath caught. Switzerland? The treatment. He glanced at her. Dr. Phillips recommended a facility there. The success rates are promising. I've arranged everything. If you'll both consider it. Ashley grabbed Kennedy's hand. Can we, Aunt Kenny? Please? Kennedy looked at her niece's hopeful face, at the way Nathaniel was already sketching mountain views and star-watching platforms, at the future suddenly sprawling out before them, full of possibilities she'd been too afraid to imagine. Yes, she whispered, feeling walls crumble and foundations shift. Yes, we can. Ashley beamed, already directing Nathaniel to add more telescopes to his sketch, but his eyes stayed on Kennedy, full of questions and promises, and the kind of love that rebuilt things from the ground up. Outside the window, a butterfly landed on the glass, bright blue against the grey Chicago sky, defying the winter wind to chart its own course. Kennedy watched it flutter away, carrying with it the last of her carefully constructed defenses. Sometimes, she realized, the most beautiful designs came from letting go of the original blueprints entirely. Sometimes, love looked like hospital sketches and butterfly gardens and the courage to tear down every wall you'd ever built. Sometimes, temporary things became foundations for something permanent, and sometimes, just sometimes, they became home. The Swiss clinic looked nothing like a hospital. Nestled in the Alps, its modern glass structure reflected the mountains like a mirror, making it seem to disappear into the landscape. Ashley pressed her face against the window of the private jet Nathaniel had arranged, her eyes wide with wonder. "It looks like our drawings," she exclaimed. "Mr. Rhodes, look." Nathaniel leaned forward from his seat beside Kennedy, his smile genuine. "It does. Though your design had more butterflies, we can add them." Ashley's voice was stronger than it had been in weeks, the excitement of the journey bringing color to her cheeks. "And the telescope garden, and," she yawned, the long flight finally catching up with her. "Rest, sweetie." Lauren adjusted her daughter's blanket. "We'll have plenty of time for designing later." Kennedy watched Ashley drift off to sleep, acutely aware of Nathaniel's warmth beside her. The past week had been a whirlwind of preparations, expedited passports, medical transfers, Lauren's leave of absence from work. Through it all, Nathaniel had been there, handling logistics with quiet efficiency while giving them space to process the enormous changes. "You're thinking too loud," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "Just wondering what your father said about all of this." Nathaniel's hand found hers between their seats. "Oh, he asked to meet Ashley before we left. Did I tell you that?" Kennedy turned to look at him. "No, what happened?" She showed him her hospital designs. All of them, from the first butterfly garden to the latest astronomical observatory. His voice softened with memory. He listened to every detail, asked questions. By the end, I hadn't seen him smile like that since before Daniel died. What did he say? He said maybe the Rhodes legacy needed fresh eyes. New possibilities. Nathaniel's thumb traced patterns on her palm. Then he told me not to waste any more time trying to be the son he thought he wanted, instead of the man he actually needed. Kennedy's throat tightened. "And Victoria is announcing her engagement to a real estate developer from Boston. Apparently, they've been in love for years, but were both too caught up in family expectations to admit it." His lips quirked. "We're having lunch next week to discuss a genuine partnership between our firms. No marriage required." The plane began its descent, banking through clouds that parted to reveal snow-capped peaks and pristine lakes. Ashley stirred, blinking at the view. "It's like a fairy tale," she whispered. Kennedy felt Nathaniel squeeze her hand. "Yes," she said softly. "It is." The next few days passed in a blur of medical consultations and settling into their temporary home, a beautiful chalet near the clinic that Nathaniel had somehow arranged on short notice. Ashley's treatment would take months, but early signs were promising. Her doctors spoke of possibilities instead of preparations, of futures instead of limitations. On their fourth night, after Ashley had fallen asleep surrounded by new sketches and Lauren had retired to call their parents with updates, Kennedy found Nathaniel on the chalet's balcony. He stood looking at the stars, his usual suit replaced by a casual sweater that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "Your contract ends next week," he said without turning around. Kennedy moved to stand beside him. "I know. I received an interesting call today from the partners at Maxwell and Wong. Apparently, one of Chicago's top law firms is very interested in hiring a brilliant young lawyer who impressed them during the Anderson negotiations." She stilled. "You recommended me." "I didn't have to." Now, he turned to face her. "They reached out, said your handling of the sustainability clauses was exceptional. They're offering partner track. Kennedy, everything you worked for before Ashley got sick. Before I took a temporary job that changed everything." She met his gaze. "Before you. The position is yours if you want it. No strings, no obligations." His voice was carefully neutral. "You could have the legal career you dreamed of." "And what about the career I never dreamed of?" Kennedy stepped closer. "The one where I help redesign how buildings heal people. Where I turn corporate architecture into something that serves communities instead of just profits." Hope flickered in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I had my whole life planned out once. Perfect law career, perfect fiancé, perfect path forward. Then it all fell apart, and I took a temporary job out of desperation." She reached up to touch his face. "But sometimes temporary things build permanent foundations." "Kennedy, I'm saying I love you." The words fell between them like stars. "I love your brilliant mind, and your hidden warmth, and the way you look at buildings like they're living things. I love how you sneak medicine to Ashley and teddy bears with hard hats, and how you draw butterfly gardens at midnight, and how you're finally learning that being strong doesn't mean being alone." Nathaniel's hands came up to frame her face. "The job offer. There's another option. Rhodes and Associates is creating a new position, Director of Community Integration, someone to ensure our projects serve the people who'll actually use them, not just the bottom line. Someone who understands both legal implications and human needs. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Rhodes? I'm offering you a future." His voice roughened. "One where we redesign not just buildings, but possibilities. Where Ashley's butterfly gardens become real healing spaces, where we build things together instead of walls between us." Kennedy's heart raced. That sounds an awful lot like forever for someone who was only supposed to be temporary." "I love you," he said simply. "I love your fierce heart and brilliant mind. I love how you see through every defense I build, how you fight for what matters, how you've taught me that sometimes the most beautiful designs come from letting go of the original plans. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, witnessed by mountains that had seen countless stories of love and loss and redemption." From inside the chalet came the faint sound of Ashley's peaceful breathing, her dreams full of butterflies and telescopes and endless possibilities. "So," Nathaniel said softly, "what's your answer?" Kennedy smiled, remembering a cold morning in Chicago when she'd stood before Rhodes and Associates, telling herself it was just for 3 months, just temporary, just a means to an end. "Yes," she whispered against his lips, "to all of it, to everything." His kiss tasted like starlight and promise, like foundations built on truth instead of expectations, like love that had grown in the spaces between temporary and forever, between what was planned and what was possible. Behind them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the sky. Kennedy didn't see it, but Ashley, who had sneaked out of bed to check on her telescope garden plans, made a wish on it anyway. A wish for butterflies and healing, for love and second chances, for buildings that touched the sky and hearts that dared to build new dreams. A wish that, unknown to her, had already come true. "The butterfly garden opens today," Ashley announced, practically bouncing as she adjusted her architect's hard hat, a perfect miniature of the one she'd received in the hospital 2 years ago. At 12, She was tall and healthy, her eyes bright with the same creative fire that had sustained her through months of treatment. Kennedy watched her niece direct the landscaping team with authority beyond her years, fighting back tears at how far they'd come. The Children's Healing Center stood proudly against the Chicago skyline, its innovative design a testament to transformation. Glass walls curved like wings, gardens spiraled toward the sky, and everywhere you looked, there were spaces designed for hope. "She's quite the project manager," Nathaniel said, appearing beside Kennedy with 2 cups of coffee. "The construction team actually prefers dealing with her over me." "That's because she doesn't make them redo things 3 times to achieve perfect structural harmony," Kennedy teased, accepting her coffee. "And 2 times," he corrected with mock severity. "The 3rd revision was your idea, Director Brooks Rhodes." The name still gave her butterflies, even after 6 months of marriage. Their wedding had been small, held in the Swiss Alps just after Ashley was declared cancer-free. Lauren had cried, Ashley had insisted on releasing actual butterflies, and Nathaniel's father had given a speech that left not a dry eye in attendance. Richard Rhodes had lived 4 months longer than the doctors predicted, long enough to see the initial designs for the Children's Healing Center, long enough to tell Nathaniel that Daniel would have loved it, long enough to make peace with the past and embrace a future different from the one he'd planned. "Earth to Kennedy." Nathaniel's voice brought her back to the present. "Where did you go?" "Just thinking about blueprints." She leaned into him. "And how sometimes the best ones come from letting go of the original plan?" He understood, as he always did. "Speaking of plans, there's something we should discuss." "Aunt Kenny, Uncle Nat," Ashley called from the garden entrance. "They're ready for the final inspection." The butterfly garden was everything Ashley had imagined that first day in her hospital bed. Native plants created natural pathways, leading to quiet nooks designed for reflection and healing. The glass dome above would protect migrating butterflies during Chicago's winters, while telescopes positioned at strategic points allowed young patients to stargaze. But Ashley's pride and joy was the central sculpture. A massive set of butterfly wings made from thousands of tiny mirrors, each one etched with the name of a child who had fought their own battles in hospital rooms. In the right light, the wings seemed to flutter with remembered hopes and answered prayers. "Well," Ashley demanded, clipboard in hand, "does it meet Rhodes and Associates standards?" Nathaniel made a show of examining every detail, though Kennedy knew he'd personally overseen each element of construction. The integration with the pediatric ward? "Seamless access through the solar hallway," Ashley reported. "They're with adjustable privacy screens for patients who need quiet time. Emergency protocols. All paths are wheelchair accessible, with medical support stations disguised as garden features. The environmental controls can adjust for individual patient needs, and the entire space can be converted to a clean room environment if necessary. And the most important element," his eyes twinkled. Ashley grinned. "Me, the slide from the children's ward arrives precisely at the butterfly feeding station, providing both entertainment value and therapeutic motivation for physical therapy patients. Then I believe this project meets all specifications." Nathaniel's professional mask cracked into a proud smile. "Excellent work, Junior Architect Brooks." Ashley beamed, then spotted one of her favorite nurses wheeling a young patient toward the garden. She rushed off to give them the grand tour, her voice carrying back enthusiastic explanations about butterfly migration patterns. "She's amazing," Kennedy said softly. "2 years ago we almost lost her. And now she's revolutionizing medical architecture before she's even a teenager." Nathaniel wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Think she'll let us implement her designs at the new London facility?" "London can wait." Kennedy turned in his embrace. "Udi, what were you trying to tell me earlier before Ashley called us over?" His expression softened into something that made her heart race. "I had a different sort of blueprint to discuss." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Dr. Phillips sent these over this morning." Kennedy opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were medical test results. Her medical test results. She scanned them quickly, tears blurring the words she'd been hoping to see for months. "We're clear to start trying," she whispered. "Completely healthy. No lingering concerns from your childhood illness." His voice was rough with emotion. "We can start building that other dream whenever you're ready." Kennedy thought of the long road that had led them here, of a temporary job that became a permanent love, of walls torn down and foundations rebuilt, of a little girl who taught them both to see possibilities instead of problems. "I think," she said, watching Ashley show a small patient how butterflies chose their flowers, "some buildings are meant to be homes from the very beginning, even if we don't know it at the time." Nathaniel's kiss tasted of coffee and promise, and forever. Above them, butterflies danced in their protected paradise, their wings catching sunlight like promises kept. Through the glass walls, Chicago reached toward the sky, each building a testament to dreams made real. And in the garden, Ashley's voice carried on the wind. "See that butterfly, the blue one? That's how my aunt and uncle fell in love. They just needed a little help spreading their wings." Kennedy laughed against Nathaniel's chest, feeling the future unfold before them like architectural plans. Clean lines and soaring possibilities, room for growth and space for love. Room for a family that had started with a temporary contract and grown into something as permanent as stone, as flexible as steel, as beautiful as wings in sunlight. "Ready to build something new," Nathaniel murmured against her hair. Kennedy thought of the office where they'd first met, of hospital rooms transformed into gardens, of a love that had rewritten every careful plan she'd ever made. She thought of the child they would have, who would grow up knowing that the most beautiful designs came from the heart. "Yes," she said, watching another butterfly emerge from its chrysalis, wings still wet with possibility. "Yes to everything." Behind them, the Children's Healing Center rose against the sky, its windows reflecting clouds and dreams and futures yet to be drawn. Within its walls, a new generation of children would learn that healing could be beautiful, that hope had wings, that love could build things stronger than any foundation of steel and stone. And somewhere, Kennedy knew Daniel was smiling at the brother who had learned to live again, at the family built from temporary chances and permanent choices, at the butterflies that dance between earth and sky like prayers made real. Some buildings touched the sky, but some loves became the sky itself, endless, eternal, full of stars and possibilities and dreams yet to be imagined. This was their masterpiece, their perfectly imperfect design, their happily ever after, built one blueprint at a time. And it was beautiful. The end? Thanks for watching to the end. Did you like the story? Tell us what you thought in the comments below. We want to know what you think. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe now for more exciting stories you won't want to miss. Activate the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. See you in the next story. See you there.